Good morning. Haynes, would you like to call your first witness? Ma'am, please come around and have a seat. Has been sworn.
Name, please, ma'am.
Cahill.
My name is Cahill. Let me let you know that we are live streaming, maybe, or somehow recording this proceeding, and it's all very dependent on microphones. And so that microphone that's in front of you is working, but you have to be really, really close to it, about like this, for everything to be done. So if you're able to sit closer to it, or maybe pull it closer to you. Can you do that for me?
Yes. Close enough?
Well, I hope so. What's your name?
Cahill.
Okay. Now we're working great. So you are the mother of the defendant, Bryan Cahill. Is that correct?
Yes.
Right. Speak up a little bit. Remember you.
Yes.
Okay. Very good. Now, let's start off with letting the ladies and gentlemen know a little bit about you. So you're his mother, so he's 44, right?
Yes.
How old are you? That's an indelicate question for a lady, I know, but how old are you?
73.
All right. And where were you born?
Des Moines, Iowa.
And in your family of origin, how many siblings?
I have 3.
So you're one of 4.
Yes.
Again, the lady sitting next to you there, she's the court reporter, right? And she has to write down what you say. When you nod your head like this, I know you mean yes, but she can't see that you nod in your head. So it's very important that you speak in words. Don't shake your head no or nod your head yes, because we have to make a record. Can you do that for me?
Yes.
All right. So you were born in Des Moines, and you're one of 4 siblings. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what did your mom and dad do?
My father was a minister. My mother was she didn't work.
All right. Outside the home.
Correct.
As was common at that time, right? Right. And so did you grow up all the time in Des Moines?
No, we moved throughout my life. I went to 11 different schools in all parts of the country.
All right. So if your dad was a minister, how come you moved so much?
At the beginning, he was finishing school and going to seminary, and then he served some rural churches 1 year at a time, and I don't know, we just moved a lot. They moved us around a lot.
That sounds like a Methodist. Was he a Methodist?
No, he was started out a congregational minister, and then when I was young, he became an Episcopal priest.
Right. But the Episcopalians stayed put more than that.
I think he did stay a little bit more put once he became an Episcopalian, yes.
And did he do anything else for a living other than serve as a minister?
No, basically he was a full-time minister. He did do some writing, and he also had did some radio. When we lived in Washington, D.C., he had a program every day at 6:25 on the local news.
Right. So you were born in Des Moines and lived in, did you say 11 different places?
I went to 11 different schools, yes.
And so what? So you lived in Des Moines, you lived in Washington, D.C., where else?
I lived in South Dakota, Michigan, Chicago, New York State, Virginia, Montana, California, Missouri, Kansas.
That's kind of disruptive when you're changing schools that much, right?
Yes, there was some of that. My parents, in every case, we moved in the summertime so that we didn't have to go into school in the middle of the year.
I mean, when I was a boy, we moved about 4 times. My mother used to say 2 moves were like a burnout. It's kind of hard on the family to be pulling up roots and moving all the time. Do you do that?
In some ways, yes. My parents made it an adventure so that each time that we moved, it was something that was seen as a positive thing and as an adventure.
Looking back on it, was it hard on you to be changing schools and changing friends as frequently as you had to do?
Yes.
Where were you when you graduated from high school?
I actually went to went to college after my junior year in high school.
How were you able to do that?
We had moved from California to Missouri, and I already had enough credits to graduate in the state of Missouri. So they arranged for me to take college entrance exams, and so I was allowed to go to college a year early.
So you were 17 when you finished high school and started college?
I was 16 when I finished and 17 by the time I started college, yeah.
Oh, that's young.
Yes.
What year was that?
64, I believe.
1964.
When I started college, it was 1964, yes.
All right. And so, what was that like, being in college at 17?
It was difficult. There were a lot of things that went on in college that I was too young to go to, events and some places where the other kids went that I wasn't allowed to be in because I was younger. So it was difficult in some ways.
Live in the dormitory?
Yes, I did.
All right. So you were 17 living in the dormitory with 18 and 19-year-olds.
Yes.
Did you get along well with your peers?
Yes.
Where were you in college?
I was at the University of Missouri in Springfield.
What were you studying there?
Liberal arts. It was English.
Not an unusual major for a young lady at the time, right?
Yes.
Did you finish school there at the university in Springfield?
No. I transferred to a school in Iowa, a private school in Iowa, and was there for a year, and then I came home. I did 2 years at university, and then later on I did another year.
What was the school in Iowa?
It was called Midwestern College.
All right, and you studied at 2 universities but did not obtain a degree. Am I hearing you right about that?
That's correct.
How old were you when you came home?
I think I was 20.
That would have been like 1960.
Been a long time ago.
1968 or so?
Yes, sir.
That was a tumultuous time in the history of the United States.
Yes, it was.
What was the reason that you gave up your studies and came home?
I had applied and been accepted into a program that was a work-study program in Israel. And so I came home to prepare for that, and then I was supposed to go on begin that program the next fall. But it was a tumultuous time, and there, I don't remember if it was literally war, but there were events in the Middle East that prevented our group from going that fall. So I got a job and waited because they thought that they would be able to send us at the end of that year or maybe mid-semester. And we actually waited for 2 years. And then finally, we were not able to go. They couldn't run the program. So we finally, I just continued working.
So that was about the time of that Six-Day War in 1967, right?
Yes, sir.
And nobody was going to Israel for work study then.
Correct.
And so basically, you spent 2 years waiting for that to mature?
Yes.
And where were you working?
I was working at a bank in a suburb of St. Louis.
And then doing what kind of work?
It was mainly a loan processor in the loan department.
You were living with your mom and dad?
Yes.
All right. That awkward at all, living with your mom and dad at that stage of your life?
Didn't seem to be terribly so now.
Any of your siblings home with you?
Yes, I still had one. My younger brother was still at home.
Now, there were 4 of you. So where were you in the birth order?
I was the second.
Okay, so when did you meet Bryan's dad?
In 1967, I believe.
All right, so at about the time you were getting ready to contemplate going on the work study.
Yes.
Remember to answer out loud.
Yes.
Thank you. I know it seems unnatural, right? But try to remember to answer out loud. All right, so you knew Bryan's dad and were conducting your relationship with him all the time that you were thinking you were about to go to Israel for the work study program.
Yes.
All right. So eventually you all married, is that correct?
Yes.
When did you marry?
In 1968.
All right. In the middle of waiting to go to the work study program in
It
Israel.
was when they finally told us that we probably would not be able to go.
All right. So when you found out that there wasn't going to be a work study program, that's when, after you found that out, that's when you married George Cahill.
Yes.
All right. So after you all married, where did you live?
In St. Louis.
All right. In a house or in an apartment?
We were in an apartment to start with.
And were you still working at the bank?
Yes.
What was your husband doing?
He was a loan officer.
Same bank or a different bank?
No, for a different operation.
Right. So that too was a little unusual at that time to have both spouses working. Would you agree with that?
No, I think before anyone had children, I think they continued to work.
And as they will with couples that are married, children came along for you and George too, right?
Yes.
What is the name of your first child?
John.
Right. When was John born?
1971.
Right. So John is about 5 years older than Bryan. Is that correct?
Yes.
Right. So John was born, and that was your first child. So all of the business about being a mom, that was all new to you at that point. Is that correct?
Yes, being a mom was. Yeah, I had a lot of experience with young children, and so it wasn't foreign to me.
All right. So you said you were the second of 4. How much older are you than your youngest sibling?
10 years.
So as a 10-year-old girl, you were helping your mom care for an infant, right?
Yes.
So you had some experience with what to do with babies?
Yes.
Okay. So where were you living when you became pregnant with Bryan?
We were living in St. Peters, Missouri, which is a suburb of St. Louis.
Your husband still working in the banking business?
Yes.
And you still working in the banking business at the time you became pregnant, or had you stopped working?
I stopped working when my first son was born.
So, once John was born, you stayed home and cared for the young boy at home. Is that correct?
Yes.
As ladies typically did at that time in history, right?
Yes.
All right. So how did your pregnancy with Bryan go? Was there anything unusual about it? Anything that stands out to you now?
No, it was very normal.
All right. So no troubles in the pregnancy, nothing like that?
No.
All right. So he was born on the 14th of July, 1976. Is that correct?
Correct.
And was that in Missouri there, in the suburb of St. Louis?
It was in Creve Coeur, Missouri.
All right. Which is near St. Louis, I guess. I'm not
Yes.
familiar with the geography. All right. So was there anything unusual about the labor and delivery?
The labor was very short. The doctor did not make it to the hospital in time. I had arranged with him, I had taken Lamaze classes and had arranged that the birth would be natural. But he wasn't there, and there was an intern there in his place. So basically, Bryan was born very quickly. I didn't need any help, so it just was born very fast.
In the hospital, though?
Yes, it was in the hospital.
Now, that was before they had, nowadays they have birth classes and the dads are encouraged to attend and to stand by and be a coach during the birth and all that. None of that was going on at that time. Is that right?
That's correct. They didn't allow the fathers to be there at all.
So if your husband was there, he was sitting in the waiting room. He certainly wasn't in with you.
Correct.
All right. Was there when you first saw Bryan immediately after his birth, was there anything unusual to you in his appearance?
I think they told me that he was a little bit blue, which would indicate that maybe there was some oxygen deprivation.
You see that for yourself?
I don't recall seeing it myself.
And to be fair, from the moment he was born, how long did they let him stay with you after his birth?
Not very long. The intern didn't understand that I was prepared for the birth, and so as soon as Bryan was born, I reached down to touch him, and the intern started yelling at everyone that I couldn't touch him because I wasn't sterile, and for the nurses to hold me down, which isn't a good thing to do to a mother who has just birthed a child. And so I don't know what happened because I don't remember anything then for about 6 hours. So he must have had them give me something that knocked me out.
Right.
So I didn't see Bryan for about 6 hours.
That must have been upsetting to you to have the medical team that is supposed to be helping you give birth hold you down and
Yes.
doctors say don't let her touch him.
Yes.
All right. So you don't remember much after that until you woke up. When you woke up, where were you?
I was in a hospital room.
All right. And was Bryan in there with you, or did they have to bring him to you?
No, I had to insist that they brought him to me, that they bring him to me.
All right. So they weren't inclined to do it. You had to insist that they bring him.
Yes.
When you did they do it?
They did bring him, but they didn't want me. They wanted to just show him to me and then take him. So I had to be insistent about them leaving him with me for a little while.
And did they leave him with you?
They did finally, yes.
For how long?
Don't remember. I would say probably half an hour.
Not very long.
No.
Did they observe you while you held him?
Don't think so. I don't recall that they stayed with me.
But who decided when the time for you to be holding him was over, you or the hospital people?
The nurse came back and took him.
And did you protest against that?
I think I probably did ask for him to stay longer with me. The arrangement actually by the doctor had been that he would stay in my room. So I don't recall specifically what my response was, but I had expected that he would stay with me in my room.
Didn't?
No, they took him.
How long were you in the hospital before they finally discharged you all to go home?
I think we were there for probably 24 hours. The doctor had arranged for me to be able to take him home that next day, but the hospital didn't want to let him leave until he was 24 hours old. I don't remember. I'm thinking that we had to spend another night and then were able to go home the next morning. I do remember the doctor had to come over and make some special arrangements for him to be able to go home with me.
And this was your original doctor who hadn't been able to actually attend the birth.
Correct.
So this sounds like this was kind of a traumatic experience for you.
It was a little different than what I had planned, yes.
And how about comparing that to the birth of John? How were those two experiences different? Did they treat you better with your older child?
Yes, when John was born, I think I just kind of went along with whatever the hospital was doing. I wasn't aware of natural childbirth at that time, and so I just did what they told me to do.
So, what caused you to change your approach with the second child? The first one, you said, okay, well, whatever these doctors say, that's fine, we'll do it. But by the time Bryan was born, you had ideas of your own about how this ought to be.
Yes, I just had done a lot of reading and met some other people who presented a different idea to me.
And why did you reach the conclusion you did?
I thought that it was much more humane and much more loving than what I saw in the hospital with the first birth.
So after a day or two, you're finally out of the clutches of the doctors and home with your little family. Were you still living in an apartment, or were you living in a house by then?
No, we were living in a house.
Right. That you had purchased.
Yes, sir.
And your husband's still working in banking business.
Yes, in the loan business, yes.
Well, okay, so explain the difference. He's working in the loan business. Not
some of the time he was working for a bank, and sometimes he was working for, I think it was Nationwide, I think. And anyway, it was, I think, actually a loan company rather than a bank at that point.
But he was working in the financial
industry. In finance, yes.
Right, and as a loan officer, that's what he was doing?
I don't remember what the title was, but yes, that would be accurate.
And so you were at home with the two boys, right?
Yes.
And, so your husband was working 40 hours a week or more, and you're at home with the two boys.
Yes, I think he was actually a branch manager, I think but yes.
All right, so working more than 40 hours a week?
Yes.
All right. Banks and finance companies weren't open on Saturdays then, were they? Or were they?
I don't remember.
So, John was 5. Was he in school?
At the time that Bryan was born, he was, yes, I believe he was, yes.
But he would have been in kindergarten, right?
Yes.
And
or entering kindergarten.
So that's only half a day at that time.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
How'd you get him back and forth to school?
I think there was a bus that picked up the
So he rode the bus to school?
I think so, yeah.
And then while he was at school, you were at home with Bryan?
Yes.
All right, so how was he during his infancy? What kind of, some babies are quiet, happy, and contented, and some of them are fussy, and some of them are sickly. You know this, right?
Yes.
All right. So how was Bryan in his infancy?
When he was born, when he came home, he was fine for a couple of days, and then became very colicky.
When you say colicky, tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury exactly what you mean by that.
He just cried continually. He was in some kind of discomfort most of the time.
How did he demonstrate that other than by crying, if there was anything else?
I think just, at that point, I think just crying.
But how was he as an eater?
He didn't eat very well those first few months. And
were you breastfeeding him, or was he on formula? How was he
yes,
fed?
I was feeding him, yes.
You were feeding him?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so was, again, different babies respond differently to breastfeeding, right? Some of them take well and quickly and easily to breastfeeding, and some not. What was your experience with Bryan?
He seemed to do fine with it.
He seemed to do fine with it, right? And compare him to his brother. How did he do compared to how his brother did with that?
It was probably more difficult for Bryan. He was in such discomfort that I think he didn't gain weight as much at the beginning in those first few months.
All right. So again, nowadays, when children are born, man, they have regular post-birth appointments, and they've got all these charts about whether they're meeting the growth guidelines and hitting the milestones and all that. They doing that with you and Bryan?
Probably not nearly what they do now, but I think we probably at 6 weeks, 6 or 8 weeks, we probably had the first visit.
Right. And how was he doing about hitting the milestones? Was he on target or behind or ahead or what?
I think weight-wise was probably a little behind. But I think other than that, I think it was fine.
I mean, he's a big man now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Was he a big baby or no?
He was 8.5 pounds.
At birth?
Yes.
That's pretty good sized. And was he big as he grew?
He was normal sized, yeah.
So nothing unusual about that one way or the other?
No. Go ahead. Yes, I'm sorry.
All right. So let me ask you this. The town that you lived in,
Mm-hmm.
When Bryan was an infant, what was that town again?
St. Peter's.
St. Peter's, Missouri. All right.
Yes.
And did the town fathers of St. Peter's, Missouri, do anything that you noticed to try to control insects in that town?
Yes.
What did they do?
The summer that Bryan was born, they fogged for mosquitoes on almost a daily basis. I don't recall if it was every single day, but it was many times during the week. Probably.
What was the procedure? How did the town authorities do that, fogging for mosquitoes? They
had a tank on the back of a pickup truck that drove through the neighborhood, and the fog, came out the back of the truck and dispersed throughout the area.
All right. Did that drive slowly through the residential neighborhoods?
Yes, they did.
And you're indicating they did that daily?
There were times when it was every day during that summer, and times I think when it was probably every other day.
All right. So when the mosquito truck came through your neighborhood, did the fog or vapor that the truck was emitting have any odor that you could detect?
Yes, it definitely did. And
what did it smell like?
If you've ever smelled, I don't know if you've ever smelled DDT or malathion. I believe it was malathion that they were using, but it has a very strong chemical smell.
Now, you didn't go out and stand in the fog, did you?
No, sir. I was very aware of the effects of these types of pesticides, and so as soon as it was time for the truck to come through, I would bring the kids in and close up the house. It did filter in around the windows, but the kids in the neighborhood would actually ride their bikes in the fog down the street, but...
You didn't let your children do that?
No, sir.
All right, but you could smell the material even inside the house?
Yes.
Did it have any effect on you?
Somewhat, yes.
What effect did you notice it having on you?
Mostly headaches.
How do you associate those headaches with the chemical agent? Why do you know that why do you associate the headaches with the chemical agent as opposed to any other reason that you might have had a headache?
I think the timing of the headache. I understood I had an understanding of the way that the chemicals affect the brain. They cause the brain stem to swell. And so I was
Objection is sustained.
All right, so you are describing things that you've read, right?
They were things that I learned from the doctor, yes.
So here's the thing. You're up there to give your testimony about things that you know because you saw them or experienced them.
Okay, yes.
You are not allowed to say, well, Dr. Joe Schmo told me this, and that's
right. Mm-hmm. I understand.
So my question was more, you were living in the town, the chemicals were being dispersed, you avoided them as much as you could by going into the house, but you could still smell the odor and you had headaches which you associated with the chemical. So what is the reason that you associated your headaches with the chemical? Because
I only had them at the time that they were spraying.
Spraying lasted on each occasion as long as it took for the truck to drive through the neighborhood, right?
Yes, they would. Yes, the headaches would be after that exposure. They would usually lessen, and it was only during that time period in the summer when they would be fogging that I had the headaches.
And they would come every day or every other day?
Yes.
During the summer only?
They fogged that year into October.
What effect, if any effect, did you observe that it had on your children? In particular, on Bryan?
I believe, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I believe that it was the spraying that caused him to have so much discomfort for those 3 months. Once the fogging stopped in October, he settled down and didn't have nearly the irritation and the discomfort.
All right, so by that time he was about 3 months old.
Yes, sir.
And after the city quit spraying their mosquito control chemicals, then he was less colicky, less upset.
Yes.
How well did he sleep? First, how well did he sleep during the 3-month period when the fogging was going on?
The first 3 months he slept very little.
Right. And how about after the fogging stopped? How did his sleep go?
And he began to sleep. It was gradual, but he began to sleep more normally.
Now, if it was me, I'd be thinking maybe it was about time to get a new house. What was your what was your thought at the end of that summer of 1976?
I don't recall talking about moving. I think it would have been difficult for us. It was our first home.
So how long did you stay there in that time?
I believe we were there for 1 more year.
All right. So you had another summer.
2 more years, I guess we were there.
2 more summers then of, did the city keep doing the same thing, trying to control mosquitoes with the spray?
The next year they didn't fog as often. They did sometimes, but they didn't do it as often.
What about the following year?
I believe both years. They may have actually stopped that 1 year. There were some other people in the county who were protesting and actually bringing suit against the county, so I believe they stopped at some point.
Did you participate in any of that, trying to pressure the public officials to stop that?
I did make phone calls. I was not part of the lawsuit.
You didn't join the lawsuit, but you let your voice be heard about whether they should be doing that or not?
Yes, sir.
All right. So you did move out after, I think you said, 2 or 3 years. What was the cause of the move?
My husband was transferred.
All right. He had the same employer, but just sent to a different place?
Yes.
Where was he sent to?
Kansas City, or Shawnee, Kansas.
All right. So Kansas City, Kansas, or Kansas City, Missouri?
On the Kansas side.
All right. So, as ladies did at the time, when your husband transferred his job, you went with him, right?
Yes.
All right. And how did you... So by then, Bryan's about 3.
Yes.
All right.
That would be correct.
So, I mean, that's not very much time in terms of number of days. It's 36 months, but it's a big amount of time in terms of the development of a child, right? When you go from infancy to age 3, there's a whole lot of events that take place in there. Is there anything unusual about Bryan in those first 3 years of his life? I mean, so he's growing, he's learning to stand, he's learning to walk, he's learning to talk. By the time they get to be 3, they should be able to talk a little bit. What's your memory of all that before you moved to Kansas?
He was very delightful child. He was he was all boy, loved to be outside playing with his brother. He did have some he did have some difficulty expressing himself sometimes.
Tell me what you mean by that.
When he would get frustrated, sometimes he began head banging. I think he may have held his breath, do those 2 things, but especially the head banging.
What did he bang his head on?
Usually the cabinets or the floor.
Hard enough to hurt himself?
I don't think he was ever bruised. As soon as he began, I always picked him up and, didn't allow it to go on. So I don't think that there was anything I didn't feel. I didn't need to take him to the doctor. I did talk to the doctor about it. I think they told me to watch him for, as you would do for concussion.
So how often did he bang his head so that you felt you needed to intervene by scooping him up and trying to soothing him?
It's such a long time, it's hard to remember exactly.
I know this is like 40 years ago we're asking about, right? All right.
I think it probably happened several times a week, or maybe 5 or 6
regularly.
months.
regularly, every week?
I think we would have an incident with it. Yeah, I wasn't like it was on a calendar or something, but...
Right, I understand. I mean, you weren't keeping a second-by-second diary, but it was a regular experience.
It did happen quite often for a while.
What'd you do to sue them?
Mostly I just picked him up and tried to distract him, take him outside or whatever.
Was that effective?
Did happen. Yes.
Can I approach the witness, Your Honor? Yeah. Always a major project, just microphones. And bear with me. All right, Ms. Cahill, I'm going to show you something that I've marked for identification as defense exhibit number 1. Can you tell me what that is?
Bryan.
All right. And that's a photograph of your son, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Does it fairly and accurately represent the way he looked when that photograph was made?
Yes.
What place is he when that photograph was made?
That would be St. Peter's.
St. Peter's, Missouri, the place that's where you lived before you were moved to Shawnee, Kansas, where the city fathers were using their bug spray. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Right. Your Honor, will offer under evidence defense exhibit number 1.
Defendants 1 is admitted.
All right, so you're moved to Kansas. What year is that?
I believe that was, it was 1979.
Right. And so Bryan's 3 and John is about 8.
Yes.
Right. You're at home taking care of 2 boys. Your husband's working in the finance business.
Yes.
I'm guessing his move from Missouri to Kansas was a promotion for him.
Yes, I believe it was.
Right. So more pay, more responsibility, more time at the office.
Yes.
All right. John was in school, is that correct? He must have been like a second grader.
Yes.
And what were his school arrangements?
He went to the public school, and we lived out on the edge of town, so he was bused to the elementary school that was closest to us.
Right. So he'd be at school from 8 to 3. And you were at home with Bryan?
Yes, at that point, yes.
And how'd y'all pass your time? What'd you do?
Wow. I don't remember exactly, but I was a housewife, and I was also involved in our church. I did also participate in some things in John's school. So it was pretty much a full-time, take care of Bryan, take care of the house, participate in the other community and school activities.
So when you were like going to do things at the church, going to do things at your older son's school, Bryan had to come with you, right?
Yes, sir.
I mean, you didn't have any nannies at home to watch out for him. Wherever you went, he had to go with you.
That's correct. Yes, he went.
Anything unusual about how things were with him while y'all lived there in Kansas?
I think the only thing I would say is that he continued to have headaches and maybe not feel really well a lot of the time. But for the most part, he was, just all boy, wanting to play outside all the time. He was a little bit more serious, perhaps. He is very intuitive, very feeling, concerned about other people's feelings around him. He seemed often very concerned about whether someone was hurt or whether someone was in any kind of distress. Maybe a little bit more serious than my older son had been about those issues.
How'd you know that when he had a headache? Yeah, I guess he just said, "Mommy, my head hurts."
I don't remember now, but I think probably he just told me that his head that his head hurt.
Did you ever seek medical intervention for any of that?
I did. It was certainly mentioned on each visit to the doctor. I know that at one point, I really pushed it quite a bit with the doctor, and he told me that he understood that there was something going on, but he didn't know what it was. He didn't know how to determine what it was, and that he felt that it wasn't serious enough to put Bryan in a hospital or try to go through extensive testing.
Doctors a lot of times tell you when they don't know what's up. They just say, "Well, maybe you'll grow out of it."
Yes.
Right. And so, how long did y'all live in Shawnee, Kansas?
Until the end of 1981.
And when you moved from Kansas in 1981, where did you go?
We moved to Plano.
Plano, Texas.
Yes, sir.
All right. And what was the occasion? What caused the move from Shawnee, Kansas to Plano?
My husband was transferred here.
All right. Still with the same employer?
Yes.
Was that transfer or promotion?
I don't know if it was a transfer, if it was a promotion or if it was just another branch I suppose it was a larger branch here, so perhaps it was a...
So a lateral promotion, but maybe to a larger branch.
Yes.
Once again, though, more pay, more responsibility, more time at the office.
Yes, yeah.
When you moved to Plano, where did you live?
On the west side of Plano.
What's the address?
I believe it was on South Cypress.
All right. And is that the only place you lived in the city of Plano?
Yes.
The microphone's too cumbersome. I'm not going to be up there long. Witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'll show you this picture right here, Ms. Cahill. Can you identify it?
Yes.
And tell me what it is.
That doesn't look quite the same. It must be a fairly recent picture, but that is the house that we lived in Plano.
All right. 2741 South Cypress, Plano, Texas. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Does this fairly and accurately represent the way it looks, at least today?
Yes, I believe so.
And it's the same building that you lived in?
Yes.
The trees are grown up from, let's see, 91, 2001, 40 years ago, right?
Landscaping is very different, yes.
But it's the same building?
Yes, sir.
Offer defense too.
Defense 2 is admitted.
So you're in Plano. It's 1981. Your husband's working in the finance business. You're at home with Bryan and John. Bryan is about 5. Is that correct?
Yes.
Had he started school in Kansas before you moved to Plano, or did he start school once he got to Plano?
No, the last year that we lived in Missouri, I had started homeschooling.
Missouri or Kansas?
I'm sorry, in Kansas. The year before in Kansas, I had started homeschooling my older son.
All right, you were homeschooling your older son, but Bryan wasn't old enough for school, was he?
Correct.
Were you homeschooling him anyway? Because if you're homeschooling, you don't have to worry about the age.
Yes, he was included in everything.
All right. So, first of all, homeschooling in 1980 was not as well accepted as it is today. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And what was the reason that you decided to start homeschooling your children?
At the time that I began with my older son, the school that he was in, the classroom size was going to guess somewhere around 36, 38 children with one teacher. And he was working well beyond grade level, but was being held back because the teacher told me that she simply wasn't able to work with the kids who were who needed that extra, the extra materials to work at the level that they could actually work at. So, my father had introduced me to a man who had written a number of books about children's education and was beginning to write about homeschooling or other alternatives to regular school. Connected with him and was able to also connect with a private school in Kansas City that would help to arrange for John to be at school 2 days a week and then be home the other 3, and we worked out a program together.
So how did the public school officials react to that?
I don't think there was difficulty at the time because when we withdrew him from school, he was admitted into the private school that was overseeing the program.
All right. So then you moved to Plano, and what education? Did you go to the public schools there, or did you continue with homeschooling?
No, we continued to homeschool.
Go ahead.
I was going to say when we arrived here, my older son was already in a Suzuki music program. And when we came here, as soon as we arrived, we found that there were several other families in our Suzuki music group that were homeschooling. And so we immediately became part of this group of about 4 or 5 families. And I continued to homeschool.
All right. So I know what you mean when you say a Suzuki program, but the ladies and gentlemen of the jury may not be familiar with it. What is the Suzuki program?
It's a method that was developed by a man in Japan after World War II.
Suzuki.
Dr. Suzuki.
All right.
Yes.
And so how does it work?
It's what's called the mother tongue method, which is the children learning music and learning to play an instrument by listening, just as they do with language. From the time they're very young, they hear the mother language and the mother tongue, and they just pick it up. And so the idea is that music would be the same thing. They would hear the music and play it every single day. It just becomes part of their life. And Dr. Suzuki's idea was that the music be a bridge to right after World War II, there was such a sense of the world being so divided. So it was a way to bring people together and to develop the heart.
You were a girl. Did you take music lessons?
I did have some music lessons,
And
yes.
how old were you when you started?
Probably 6.
All right. And so, would you take piano?
I did start on piano, yes.
So, did you have a piano in your home, or you went to the piano teacher's house?
I had a piano in the home.
So the teacher came to your house for an hour a week and sat down on the bench with you and taught you about reading music and a space witch and
Yes.
and all that. And she tells you to practice and you don't, right?
Yes.
All right. But Suzuki's a little different than that. They start kids off really, really little, like 2 or 3, right?
Yes.
How old was John when he started Suzuki?
He was actually a little older. He was 4, which was a little older than a lot of the kids. But Bryan, of course, grew up with it from the time he was born.
So when you, how many Suzuki concerts have you been to?
Probably 1,000.
All right. They all start off with Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, right?
Yes, when the whole group is there, yes.
And amazing thing about it is you've got all these little tiny children playing the violin, which is unusual, right?
Yes.
That's a picture of Bryan Cahill in the Suzuki.
Yes.
Have you seen this that you can tell me how old he is here?
Oh, that one. He was probably 8.
8.
Maybe there.
All right. This is after you moved to Plano.
Yes.
Offer 3? No. Admitted. So, I know he's homeschooled, he's in the Suzuki program, but all is not sweetness and light because at some point you put him into occupational therapy. Is that correct?
No,
He was never in occupational therapy?
No, sir.
All right. You're wrong. How about, did he have any trouble with his fine motor skills? Gripping a pencil or anything like that?
There were some things, yes. I think holding a pencil was hard. Handwriting was a little bit more difficult for him.
All right. How about his walking gait? Anything unusual about that?
It was a little bit stilted when he was young, yes.
Tell me what you mean by stilted.
Be a little bit stiff.
Did he have trouble walking around doing the things he wanted to do, running around and playing like boys do, or no?
No. It seemed as though it was a little bit, he didn't enjoy it as much. Loved being outside and riding bikes, but when it came to things like sports and that kind of thing, it was a little bit more difficult for him. He didn't enjoy it as much. He did swim and play soccer and basketball, that sort of thing, but
There was no therapy needed for any of that?
Not as a young child, no.
Right, okay. So let me ask you, when he started school, Bryan, started school, it was all homeschool, right?
Yes, at the beginning it was, yes.
From kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, he was never enrolled in the Plano Independent School District.
He was never in Plano, but I think it was when he was in the 3rd grade, I believe. He began to go to a private school several days a week. His brother was going, and so both of them went to a school for a couple of days each week.
What school was that?
It's called the Stell School.
All right, and where is the Stell School?
It was in Garland.
All right. And wow, how'd you get him to school in Garland while living in Plano.
I drove them there.
That is a long pull.
Well, a little bit, yeah.
I mean, what time of day does the school start?
I think it probably started at 8:30.
All right, so you're leaving Plano to go to Garland 2 days a week in the middle of the rush hour traffic.
Yes, sir.
All right, so that's an hour and a half by the time you get them down to school and back to your house, right?
Yes.
And when school is ended, I guess that's before the 5 o'clock rush hour.
Yes.
But you got to drive down to school and pick them up and bring them home.
Yes.
Or at least but it was only 2 days a week, right?
Yes, sir.
And what were you doing the other 3 days?
What was I doing, or what was they doing?
What were you, as their mother, responsible for homeschooling them, doing with them for the 3 days a week?
Oh.
Not at the Stell school.
When those 3 days that they were at home, then we worked on the lessons that they had prepared for them to do the other days. They oversaw most of that, so we had the books, and they did school every day as well as their music, and they had sports, regular sports things. There were other homeschool classes that they went to during the week on those 3 days.
So how did he do with this homeschool? How did Bryan, do with this homeschool program that you had him in? Or I guess it's actually a hybrid program, because 2 days a week in private school, 3 days a week homeschool. How did he do? How did he respond to that?
He did well with that. At that time, yeah, he did well with that.
All right. So no particular problems, nothing unusual that you noticed in his behavior, no unusual behavior, nothing like that? At this time of his life?
At that time, no, I don't think so.
So at some point, you got into something called iridology. Do you remember that?
I did have a friend that was an iridologist, yes.
All right. And that's Nona Wilson, right?
Yes, sir.
So for those of us who don't know, what's an iridologist? Well, the purpose of it is to talk about the merits of iridology or whatever it is or isn't. I just want to show that she got interested in it. I want to get what she thought she was doing with it. I'm not interested in any results from it, if there are any. Sponsoring it as some expert matter that pay attention to in that. Show that it was done and what she understood. Practicing something. Not that. No, not that. All right. So what that's all about, Ms. Cahill, is we can't put things before the jury purporting to be scientific reality unless there's an generally accepted scientific consensus that subject is valid, okay?
Yes.
And, I'm not so interested in what iridology concluded about Bryan as I want to demonstrate that you were interested in it and you took him to an iridologist. So why were you interested in it?
It was one of probably many modalities that I checked out because the medical community did not seem to be able to find any of explanations for some of the problems Bryan had. He seemed to have environmental allergies. At the time, there was a lot of, I think probably one of the more popular things was Chemlon. On many times during the week, the Chemlon truck would come through and spray people's lawns. And during those times, we would have problems again with headaches, with a lot of allergy symptoms, that sort of thing. So I began to look. The doctors told me they didn't know what to do other than to give him something for the headaches, or they, couldn't determine the cause of it. So I did begin to look at other methods, acupuncture, nutritional types of things.
So, you were sensitive to concerns about this because of the experience you'd had with the mosquito trucks in Missouri, right?
Yes, sir.
And were there other reasons that you were sensitive to this going back before the birth of your children?
Well, my parents were very knowledgeable about this sort of thing. They were organic gardeners in the 50s, and I just grew up knowing those types of things. And when I moved here to Dallas, through a friend, I immediately was directed to Dr. Ray at the Environmental Health Center in Dallas.
Well, we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Okay.
So you had been concerned about this from girlhood because of your contact with your parents, right?
I was aware of it, yes.
You were concerned about this from the birth of your second son because of your experience with the city mosquito sprayers in Missouri, right?
Yes, sir.
And you observed problems after you moved to Plano, correct?
Yes.
And you called those the attention of your son's doctor or doctors, and when I say your son, I mean Bryan. You called the doctor's attention to what you were observing, right?
Yes.
And they said, well, we can treat the symptoms, but we don't know much about the cause.
Yes.
Is that what led you into looking to other resources that you might have?
Yes.
One of which was iridology.
Yes.
And regardless of the merit or lack of merit of that, you were pursuing that and trying to do something with it. Is that correct?
It was one tool, yes.
Right. And, of course, the iridologist charged you for her services, right?
Yes, I believe so.
Paid the sum asked, right?
Yes.
And did you pursue other, I think you already said you tried acupuncture.
Our family doctor, probably from the early 1980s, when we were here, was an Oriental medicine doctor and an acupuncturist.
So again, that was a bit unusual, more unusual in the early 1980s than it is now, right?
Yes.
How old was Bryan the first time he ever had acupuncture?
I'm not certain. Do you want me to guess?
Child, though, right?
Yeah, probably.
What was his reaction to that?
I don't remember. I think it seemed fairly normal to him, probably. I'm not certain if the acupuncturist didn't always use needles. He often just used hands on the...
All right. So how long were you working with the iridologist?
Well, she was a friend. I got to know her after the first visit, so we saw her many times, but as far as just the iridology, probably only did it a couple of times where she actually, had a session and we had the results.
Did it do any good?
Well, it was just a tool to try to understand what was going on with Bryan.
So you're still observing the things that caused you to be concerned enough about this to start looking around?
Yes, I was just looking for answers as to what was going on and how I could help to help for some healing and some.
All right, so you mentioned headaches. What else, if anything else, did you observe that caused you to be concerned?
Probably the headaches and just a lot of sinus congestion and.
Mr. Haynes?
Sure.
Has the witness testified what she understands iridology to be?
No, but I'll ask her that.
All right.
What do you understand iridology to be?
It's a diagnostic tool. In the iris of the eye, you can see the nerve endings, and so it gives some indication of the of the organs in the body and the health or the challenges to the organs in the body.
So the hope is that the trained person can look in, the iris is the colored part of the eye, right?
Correct.
You got the white of the eye, you got the pupil, and then around the pupil is the iris. That's the part that is colored. That's what causes us to say you are a brown-eyed person, you are a blue-eyed person, right?
Yes, sir.
So an iridologist thinks that if you look at the iris of a person, that will help you diagnose what ails them.
You can see the nerve endings just as you do in other parts of the body, but yes, you can see the nerve endings there.
So that was the purpose of it, to try to figure out what Bryan's troubles were.
It's one of the tools, yes.
And so have you explained to me and to the jury what troubles you were observing in Bryan that caused you to use iridology and other techniques to find out what they were?
Could you restate that question?
All right, so you've mentioned that he seemed to have congestion. You mentioned that he seemed to have headaches.
Mm-hmm.
Was there anything else that made you say, there's something going on with this boy, I need to try to figure out what it is, beyond those two things that I've just mentioned?
There were a few other things.
What were they?
Eye contact was uncomfortable for him. Some of the social interactions were difficult for him. Some of the fine motor skills were more difficult.
Did you ever have any intervention dealing with those fine motor skills?
We did work with the different things. I don't remember what it was called, but we did have him work with some people who did some, I guess we would call it therapies.
Did they seem to do any good?
Yes, I think we had some improvement, yes.
And what were the therapies?
I don't remember what they were called now.
Okay, that's fine. All right, so when we hear the symptoms you're describing, right, difficulty with social relationships, not wanting to make eye contact with people. Today we might say, you know what, that's kind of on the autism spectrum. We might say that today, right?
Yes, sir.
Did you know anything about autism? And first of all, when was this? What year?
Well, it was ongoing.
So from the time you moved to Plano in 1981.
Some of these things probably we've noticed earlier than that. My mother had a friend that worked with autistic children, and who had mentioned at one point that she saw some behaviors in Bryan that were indicative to her.
You see those behaviors?
I don't remember what they were now, and I really did not know anything about autism at the time, other than it was just in the most overt cases.
So, therefore, since you didn't know anything about it, and most people didn't know much about it then, you didn't pursue that. Fair?
That's correct, yes. When I would mention it to the doctors, they were not very aware of the more subtle forms for sure, and so it wasn't pursued.
All right. So he's comes to Plano. It's 1981. He's about 5 years old, and he's continuing in Plano. He's playing in the Suzuki band. He's in school with his brother 2 days a week in Garland, 3 days a week at your house. How things going well or not well?
I think they went very well up to maybe about age, maybe 9 or 10.
Right. So what happened at 9 or 10 to cause you to focus in on that year?
He had always had lots of friendships in the neighborhood, played with the neighborhood kids in the afternoon after school, but began to have some problems with not coming home on time or not being where he was supposed to be. I don't know how much of that is really unusual at that age, but I do recall that we were beginning to have those incidents. He had always been very well behaved, and things were beginning to go a little awry.
That was a matter of concern for you and his dad, right?
Yes.
And compare him to his brother in that regard. Were you having similar problems with John, or no?
No.
First of all, John's 5 years older, right? So if Bryan is 9, then John is 14, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a whole different set of problems.
Yes.
Were the brothers close at that age?
They were very different, but they did get along. Yeah, it didn't.
A boy who's 14 might feel that his 9-year-old kid brother was a pain in the rear, right?
Yeah.
Was there any of that going on?
I'm sure there was some of that because they were homeschooled and also involved in a lot of the same activities. They interacted
they were
a great
together
deal.
A lot.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the older one picks on the younger one, sometimes the younger one picks on the older one. What was the pattern in your family?
I think it was more likely for the older one to pick on the younger one.
Right. What way? By what means? What did he do?
Just criticism, maybe. I don't recall exactly, but probably just.
Nothing that jumps out at you. You didn't have to pry them apart because they were beating on each other.
No.
Right. How'd these boys get along with their dad?
They didn't interact very much with their dad. Was not very involved in their. He went to work in the morning. He was he played handball. He was an athlete, and he played handball every evening after work, and so he was usually not home until fairly late in the evening.
Boys going to bed by the time he gets in from his handball play?
Close to that, yeah.
All right. So the person dealing with whether or not they're coming home on time, whether or not they're getting their homework done, that's you, right?
Yes, sir.
Any conflict between you and your husband over that?
Probably not over that specific issue, no.
All right. So what involvement, if any involvement, did he have with discipline or interacting with the boys when they were doing things that y'all didn't see as being so good?
When they were young, I don't remember that there was very much of that, not until they were older.
So when they were young, and so Bryan 9, John 14. Dad's, he's not interacting with them positively. He's not interacting with them negatively. He's just not interacting with them much.
I think there was not a great deal of interaction. There were times when it was negative. There were times when it was positive. But there was a lot of, just not a lot of involvement.
I mean, they weren't in the Boy Scouts. He didn't take them camping or fishing. He didn't take them to the baseball games. Is that true or not true?
I believe, I think he probably did attend. My older son played basketball with whatever the league was in Plano. He played basketball from the time he was very young. And this time he moved in, actually, I guess soccer and basketball both. So I think his father would go to those games. He wasn't very involved in them, but he did attend those games. And he did take them. I know he used to take Bryan down to the YMCA downtown where he played handball. He would take him there quite often.
So, and to be fair to him, he really, we're not in a position to ask your ex-husband about any of this, right?
Yes.
I mean, y'all are divorced now, right?
Yes, sir.
And when were you divorced?
About 21 years ago.
And so Bryan was a young man then, 20, 21, 22, something like that?
Yes.
And your ex-husband is ill, right?
I think right now he's doing fairly well right now. He does have some cognitive issues, yes.
Right. So because of his cognitive difficulties, he's really not able to hold a conversation, testify in court, anything like that, right?
There would probably be some difficulty with that.
All right. So is there any point in Bryan's childhood when he was about 10 that he was injured, his head was injured?
There was an occasion that where something was thrown over a fence. I think it was a piece of wood or something, and it did hit him in the head. And I think he had some other occasions, where he, just as boys will, where there were some things, but that one in particular, yes.
Did you witness that?
I don't recall witnessing it, but I am aware of it a long time ago, and I really don't remember the exact circumstances around it.
How old was he?
I think maybe around 10.
And did you witness the effects of it anyway? Was there any injury that resulted?
Well, I think that he had a lump on his head, and if I remember correctly, I think the doctor just said to keep an eye on him and, don't let him go to sleep, and keep an eye on him, look for the signs of concussion, that sort of thing. So he wasn't hospitalized because of it.
It was bad enough that you took him to the doctor.
Well, I called the doctor.
All right, but no follow-up beyond that.
I don't believe so.
You were his mother, you are his mother, you were living with him every day at the time. Did you observe any ongoing effects after he got hit in the head by something thrown?
I don't think I identified anything as being a result of that.
So, did he continue with that Stell school and 3 days a week at home, or were other arrangements made for school?
I think it was just the 1 year that he went to Stell.
You ever go to the Hillcrest Academy?
Yes.
What school is that?
Sorry, I'm trying to remember where he went. I think he was home for a year. I think then I think by the time that we were hitting fifth grade, I was thinking that he needed to be in school, that he needed that. Rather, there was just that I thought that he needed to be in school.
Right, so why did you think you needed to make a change from what you were doing? Because he was in school 2 days a week and studying at home with you and your brother 3 days a week. But then when he got to fifth grade, you wanted to send him to school.
Yeah, the stealth school moved, and they moved further away. It was just too far to continue to drive there. So I looked for some other schooling options for him. I remember that someone had suggested along the way that they thought he might have some learning disabilities, and so to maybe look into those. And as part of that, I went and talked with a school that had specialized in learning disabilities. They did some initial testing and suggested that we enroll him. He was there for a year, at which time they determined that he did not meet any of the guidelines for, he didn't have ADHD, didn't have, the learning disabilities that they identified.
What school was that?
Remember if that was Hillcrest. I'm sorry. I think it was Hillcrest.
Where is it?
It was in Dallas. I think it was on Hillcrest.
And private school, right?
Yes, sir.
So you had tuition to pay?
Yes.
How much was the tuition?
I don't remember.
You weren't working for money outside the home, right?
Correct.
And your husband had a regular middle-class job, right?
Yes.
Was it hard for you to meet the expense of private school?
I don't recall it being an issue.
Right. So you had to drive him from Plano down to Dallas on Hillcrest every day, 5 days a week, right?
Yes, he did have to be driven to school every day, yes.
And once again, that's during the morning rush hour, right?
Yes, sir.
So it's, again, not at least an hour every morning, and then again in the afternoon, 5 days a week.
Strains, is now an okay time to take a break?
Yes, sir.
All right, members of the jury, let's take our morning recess. Please be back in the jury room in about 10 minutes, and we will continue.
All right.
All right, we'll be in recess for 10 minutes.
Hurry really fast. It's down on the
Did?
All right, so Ms. Cahill, before the recess, we had you up to about his age 10 or so, so that would have been 1986. He'd had a head injury that you became aware of. Did you, at about his age 10 or 11, did you notice any change in his, and when I say his, I mean Bryan's, behavior?
Yes.
What did you notice?
It was around this time that it became more difficult. He didn't come home when he was supposed to come home as much. He was beginning to go with some of the kids in the neighborhood that were older.
How much older?
Maybe 2 or 3 years older, which
right,
can
so
be
he's 10 and they're 12 and 13.
Yeah, there were some kids that were 2 or 3 years older. Some of them were.
Is his brother part of this group or no?
No.
By that time, his brother is 15. He's gone on to other companions.
Yes. His brother didn't have so many friendships directly in the neighborhood. Most of his friendships were outside our neighborhood, whereas Bryan's were mostly in the neighborhood.
All right, and was this causing conflict within the family, that he was hanging out with older kids, not coming home when he was supposed to come home? Was that a source of tension between you and your son?
Yes, sometimes it was.
And how about a source of tension between your son and his father?
At times, yes.
I'm guessing that as behavior deteriorated, the father's involvement became greater.
At times, yes. At times, yes.
All right. And when the dad's involvement becomes greater in the context of deteriorating behavior, I'm guessing the interaction between father and son is more negative than positive. Is that fair?
Yes.
What did your husband try to do to induce Bryan to bring his behavior up to standards that the parents were more accepting of?
I think most of the time at this stage he was talking with him or trying to involve him more in activities that he could do with him.
Physical conflict between father and son?
Don't believe there was at this age, no.
But later there was?
When he was a teenager, there were a couple of times.
All right. So as part of all this schooling, you send him to the Stell school, you send him to the Hillcrest school. Did you ever have an IQ test done on him?
He did have an IQ test, at least.
All right. So I'm not going to ask you what the result was, but the test was done and the result was reported to you. Is that correct?
Yes, I think maybe once or maybe even twice, but I do remember in third grade, yes, that it was for sure.
And, I don't know how useful the IQ test is for telling anyone anything about anyone, but as parents, we all love to hear that our kids are smart, right?
Yes.
Did you like to hear what you heard from the IQ test results?
Yes, they were. His IQ was high.
So he's 10, he's 11, we'll do that with another one. Thank you for your help. All right. All right. So he's 10, he's 11. He's running with kids in the neighborhood that are a couple years older. He's not coming home when you think he should be. What other, if any other, behavioral problems are you noticing?
We're talking about a particular age? Can you?
Well, so this age that we're talking about now, he's 10 or 11 in there, right? So at this time, and so it's 86, 87 in there, if that helps you. What, if anything else, are you noticing in his behavior, if anything?
Just the things that we talked about. There were some of the kids in the neighborhood.
Let me ask you this: what concerned you about the older kids in the neighborhood? What was your worry about that?
Just that they were able to do things that they were able to go places and do things that I didn't think were so age appropriate for him.
Such as?
They were beginning to have motorcycles, and I don't think they were probably into driving yet, but I didn't know where they were going and what they were doing.
So was he riding on motorcycles with these kids 10 and 11?
I don't think at 10 or 11, but probably just a year or two later, yes.
12, he's riding on motorcycles.
I think probably it was beginning at that age.
All right, so are these kids that are riding them on motorcycles, do they have licenses to drive motorcycles?
I don't know.
I mean, that would concern me. Mm-hmm. If I had a 12-year-old of mine who was riding around on a motorcycle with a 14-year-old, that would concern me.
Yeah, I don't believe they were on the street, but...
well, you can bust your head on a motorcycle on a trail. You don't have to be on the street.
Yes.
Did you know that they were riding motorcycles around there?
Not at that age, not until I was a little bit older.
But did you know the parents of these other kids with the motorcycles?
Only a few.
Right.
Which was a concern because there were some of the kids whose parents I didn't know, wasn't able to connect with them.
I mean, and one of the concerns is these are the kind of parents who give a 14-year-old a motorcycle, right?
Yes.
I mean, you've had two sons that were 14 years old. Did you ever give them motorcycles?
No, sir.
Why?
Because it was dangerous.
14-year-olds with motorcycles don't mix very well, do they?
No, sir.
All right. Did he ever get hurt on a motorcycle?
I think he did have an accident on a motorcycle.
When and where did that happen?
I think it was probably when he was maybe about 13. I don't know a whole lot about it because at the time that it happened, I don't think he reported it to us immediately because he knew he wasn't supposed to be doing it.
You knew you wouldn't want him to be out riding on a motorcycle.
Yeah.
Did you observe the injury? I mean, I know you didn't see the accident happen, but did you observe the effects of the injury?
I just remember, it's been so long. I'm not certain, but I do remember that that he had it, and I think again we did the same thing with just observing, keeping an eye on him so that if he didn't have the after effects of a concussion or something along those lines.
And what about that? Were there any other after effects that you observed?
I don't remember that there were any.
So you said before that eventually things between him and his father reached a point of physical conflict. Is that correct?
Yes.
When did that happen?
I think he was maybe 14.
What caused it?
I don't actually know. I just remember that they got into a verbal confrontation, and
what was the argument about?
I don't remember.
Did it get resolved?
I remember that his dad hit him and knocked him down.
Right. Did you see that happen?
I did see that.
What did you think about it?
I was very concerned about it. At the time, we had been seeing a counselor, and the counselor had several counselors, and they had very much encouraged me to step back as much as I could, that he had too much mom and not enough dad in his life, and to allow, as he was becoming a young man, to allow him to learn how to work out those issues with a man, with his father. And so I tried to remove myself from it as much as I could and let them work it out.
Was the counseling family counseling around your relationship with your husband, or more around the relationship between the parents and the children?
As I recall, it was more a relationship with the children.
All right, so it was the parents trying to improve the relationship with the children.
Yes.
When did you start that?
I don't remember exactly.
All right, how long did it continue?
We probably started when maybe he was 12 or so.
All right. So how long did it last?
And from there on, it was through all the, all the programs and all the things he was in until he was he was in his early 20s. There was,
so
we were involved in a lot of it.
8 years of counseling of one kind or another.
At various times, yes.
All right. So overall, looking back on it now, what positive effect, if any positive effect, did that counseling have?
On me, on Bryan, on the family?
On you and your relationship with your son and his relationship to you and his dad. I mean, because was it his behavior that was causing you all to decide to resort to counseling?
Yes.
All right. And that's not an easy decision to make, is it, to put your family in counseling?
Initially, it was, I guess it was somewhat difficult.
You're having trouble with talking about it right now, 40 years later or 30 years later, right?
Yes.
Because the idea in our society is, hey, we should all be able to deal with our problems, and we shouldn't parade them out before a room full of strangers, and we shouldn't be referring them to professionals. We should handle it in-house, right? And you still have some of that feeling right now, right this second as you sit there, right there, don't you? Right. And so it's not easy to have made the decision, especially in 1989, 1990, whatever it was, to do this, because, it's probably more accepted now than it used to be, but there's still a stigma to it, right? All right, so my question is, what was it that made you say, you know what, I've got to overcome all this, we got to do something? What caused you to make that decision?
I don't recall exactly where that started, but I think just that I felt that things were getting so out of control that I just needed some help in knowing how to deal with it.
All right. How about his peers or near peers? Were they positive or negative influences on him?
It was a mixture of both.
What were the ones that you identified as more negative?
There was one boy who had moved into the neighborhood or maybe Bryan probably was about 8, that it just seemed as though from the very beginning, whenever he was with him, there would be problems that.
Who was that boy?
I don't want to.
I want to say his name. All right. Well, what were the problems?
Initially, they were just that he didn't come home on time, or he would maybe be places that I thought he shouldn't be. And at some point, there were some things that they were doing that were concerning to me, some activities that they were involved in that were concerning to me.
That house on whatever that street was where you lived, Cypress, where was that compared to the Collin Creek Mall?
It was quite a distance.
Right.
I can't remember exactly.
You know about that big tunnel that goes under Collin Creek Mall, or the old side of it that carries the stream? Were they hanging around down in there?
I don't think they were that far away. It's certainly not when he was younger. I don't know how far they went. We did have a creek that was fairly close that they would go to.
All right. So let's go back to the school for a minute. So he was at Scale Academy, then he went to Hillcrest. He was there for a year. What'd you do about school after he got out of Hillcrest?
I think we did a year of homeschool and some correspondence courses.
Did he ever go to the Esperanza Academy?
He did for the beginning of a semester. I believe that was probably maybe 1990.
Or what year? So it was 1990?
I believe that was
All right,
1990.
So schooling is some like yours when you were a little girl, right? Because you were in, remember, answer out loud. Schooling was some like yours when you were a little girl, right?
Maybe in some ways.
Well, I mean in that you went to 11 schools. Didn't you tell me 11 schools?
Yes, sir.
And he went to Stell Academy, Hillcrest. He went back to homeschool. He went to Esperanza Academy, all in the space of 1981 to 1990.
Yes.
All right. So did you see that as positive, as negative, as just par for the course? How did you see that?
I didn't like moving him around. I was, again, looking for something that would be helpful to him.
All right. And in the moves that took place, did that seem to be helping him or no?
He did well academically. I don't think it was particularly helpful to him socially, although he just continued the neighborhood friendships, but I don't think he really formed relationships with the children in the school that he went to.
He didn't have many friends at school?
I don't think so, not very many else that he...
Was he still participating in the Suzuki?
I think he stopped playing maybe when he was about 10 or 11.
All right. Were you supportive of that decision, or did you wish he'd stayed in it?
I wish that he had continued, but I let him make that decision. His brother was still in the program, so he still participated without playing his cello in regular classes.
I mean, because that Suzuki program, the kids that go all the way through it and get to be 18, 19, some of those people end up at the Juilliard school, right? I mean, they can be at the very top of their profession. It's a positive thing. Can be, right?
Yes.
But he didn't want to be in it, and you didn't push it.
I pushed it a little bit, but at a certain point, I let him make that decision, yes.
All right. So he was only at the Esperanza Academy for a couple months, right?
Correct.
What happened?
He and his dad were getting into more conflicts, and they had one, I think, that was particularly troubling. I believe it was in November, and he had just started school there in September, I think. And I had friends that had experience with the wilderness program in Arizona.
What did you understand the wilderness program to be?
the kids were in a program where they were out on the trail as a group, and the idea was that they receive counseling as well as just the experience of surviving on a trail. They obviously, because of regulations, they had to provide some food for them, but they learned survival skills on the trail. So there were some very positive aspects of that, and the idea was that they stayed on the trail until they had a change of heart, till they recognized that what was causing the problems at home, began to identify what some of the behaviors needed to be changed and how that might take place. And when the counselors felt that they had made that change of heart, then they brought the families in, and eventually the kids came home.
So that happened because of conflict between father and son, right?
Yes, that was the
What was the nature
instigator.
of the conflict between father and son that caused Bryan to be sent to the wilderness program?
Well, there was an incident where I think his father challenged him to basically to fight it out with him in the backyard. I was not out there. I wasn't a witness to it, but from the information that I got from his father and from Bryan, I think that was basically it, that he wanted him to come out and...
Actually a fight, or do you know?
I think that there was, but I don't think that Bryan probably fought back. He probably didn't want to hurt his father, I don't think, so...
Was Bryan injured in the encounter?
I don't recall that he was injured.
But it was serious enough that the decision was made to put him in the wilderness program.
Well, I decided to go ahead with it at that point, yes. It looked
Did he want to go, Bryan?
I'm not sure that he really wanted to go, but I explained it to him. My father was very involved with it at the time with the decision, and prior to the decision to do that, I had been speaking with him about it. My parents lived in El Paso, and I think between talking to me and talking to his grandfather, I think Bryan decided that he would go.
All right. So did he have a good relationship with your dad?
Yes.
How about with his father's dad? Did he have a good relationship with him or no?
I think he did, but he was not. None of them lived here, and he didn't see their grandfather very often.
And of course, your dad lived in El Paso. It's a pretty good pull from Plano to El Paso. How often did he see your dad?
Yeah, we probably only were physically together. I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 times a year, but my dad had always every week written a letter to the family, and there were phone calls also, so there was a lot of contact.
Oh, again, this wilderness program is not cheap. You have to pay for it, right?
Yes.
What did it cost?
I don't remember. I think it was probably around $9,000, but I don't remember for certain.
Right, so $9,000 has to be paid in advance before the program begins, right?
I would expect so. I don't recall the exact.
And how long did it last?
Bryan was out for about 3 months
So,
to begin with.
living in the desert for 3 months.
Yes.
Did you have any contact with him during that time?
By letter. Did by letter, yes.
So he was able to send letters to you, and you were able to get letters back to him?
Yes.
What's the turnaround time? How long does it take for you to get a letter from him and for him to get a letter back from you? I guess mail delivery in the desert is not...
Well, they did have
reliable.
staff that went in and out on a regular basis, so they did carry the mail back and forth. I think probably 5 days to a week most of the time.
And how frequently did you write?
Probably several times a week. We did have some parent programs also that we went.
So very frequently, right?
Yes.
Almost nobody writes 3 letters a week to the family anymore these days, do they?
Well, not now, but it was more common at the time, yes.
All right. And so, based on the correspondence that was going back and forth, what was your impression about what progress he was making in the wilderness program?
I could see the progress as he went along. I could see the progress.
From the letters, you could see that progress was being made.
Yes, I could see that.
So, do you remember what day the program ended and he came back home?
It was sometime, I believe, towards the end of January. We had been there for some parent programs a couple of times, and they stayed in very good contact with us and let us know. My dad was in contact with them, especially on a weekly basis, and they let us know in advance when they thought that he might be finishing up, because at the end of the program, the parents would come out, and we spent a night with him in basically in his camp.
This is 1991, right? January 1991.
I think that's correct, yes.
So at that point, he's like 15 or 16, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so once you got him home...
He's 14, maybe at that
14,
point.
all right.
So.
Once you got him home, were things better or not?
Yes, they were better for some time, yes.
How long?
Maybe, I think after maybe a few months, we began to see some of the old patterns. He began to interact more with the kids in the neighborhood that he had been dealing with before, and we began to see some of the old issues surfacing.
The same bunch of negative peers that you'd been concerned about before he went to Arizona?
Some of them, yeah.
All right, and what about school at that point? What were you doing about school?
I think we continued to homeschool through the end of that year, since he'd come back in the middle of a semester. I don't recall specifically, but I think we continued with a course. He was in a correspondence school, the American school, and
the American school?
It's called the American school, yeah.
Where is that?
I don't know where they're headquartered now, but it was a school that's basically been used for many, many years by the families of diplomats, foreign service people, and some when they're overseas. So it's been around for a very long time.
So it's set up to be a correspondence school?
Yes, sir.
Set up to be a homeschool?
Yes, sir.
So wherever their headquarters is didn't matter, because he didn't go to the headquarters.
Correct.
He was being schooled at home, right?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. So eventually he ended up back in the wilderness program for a second time. Is that correct?
Yeah, they offered as part of the program that when the kids got home, if they began to have difficulties again, there was the opportunity to come back out. They felt that it was sort of a mixed bag, that maybe parents shouldn't expect too much. Sometimes trying to go back the second time wasn't terribly helpful, but sometimes it was, and so they offered that, and we discussed it with Bryan when we began to see some issues, asked him if he would be willing to do that, see if he could just kind of maybe finish up out there and come to a point where he felt like he was really back on track more solidly, and he agreed to do that. So he did go back out for just a short period of time, because the program, the second tour, so to speak, was set up to be just a few weeks.
Right. First one had been 3 months, right?
Yes.
And then the second one was 3 weeks, or a few?
I don't remember the exact length of it, but maybe 2 or 3 weeks, something like that.
All right. And again, what result, if any result, did you observe from that?
Again, he did, if I remember correctly, I think he did quite well when he first came back. But as the summer started, the other kids were out of school. We started to see some of the same issues coming up again. I'm beginning to wonder whether we were seeing drugs or not. We didn't know, but there were, just some of the same things coming up again.
I mean, did you see anything that made you think he was using substances?
I don't recall exactly what there was.
All right. So you indicated that he was he's been homeschooled.
Mm-hmm.
So did he just stay around the house all the time, or did he leave the house and go other places?
He had, he had the friends in the neighborhood, but, prior to that, he, for all those years, we had many activities on a daily basis during the week that were not in our home. They had a lot of classes. They had, one of the parents, the father of one of the families that was in our homeschool group was the president of a private university here in Dallas, and through him we were able to access a lot of resources and classes and things that probably were a little bit unusual.
Did he ever work?
Yes.
Where did he work?
When he was 13, I discovered that he had gotten a job on his own at a restaurant not far from home where some of his older friends lived. We didn't know.
What restaurant was that?
It was called Plano Steakhouse.
That's over on Parker, right? Across the street from Country Burger.
It was.
Now it's out of business.
Yes, sir.
All right. Did you know he was working at the Plano Steakhouse?
I didn't know when he got the job. No, I didn't realize that he was working there. He was working just a few hours in the afternoon after school when I just thought he was with the kids, and I guess he was, but several of them worked there, and so he began working there too.
He was 13.
He was.
What was his job there at the Plano Steakhouse?
He, I think, started out probably as a busboy, but washing dishes and bussing and cooking. He did become, he did start to cook also. I found out about it when the owner realized at some point what Bryan's age was and came to the house and told us Bryan was working there, and he didn't realize that Bryan was underage.
Underage, right. So he wanted to kind of take responsibility for that and let you know that was going on.
Yes, and ask our permission for him to continue.
Was it okay with y'all for him to continue working there?
I was happy to have him working there. I thought that was a very positive thing. Yes.
How much money did he make?
I don't.
What did you do with
I don't remember. The money we discovered he was saving up his money to buy a motorcycle. So we had the motorcycle issues again, yes.
All right. Okay. Now, after the second trip to the wilderness program, would you say Bryan's difficulties got worse, got better, stayed the same? How would you characterize that?
I didn't know that they changed so much in the actual description, but it was becoming more troublesome because he was older. The consequences seemed more severe.
Tell me specifically what you mean by that.
One of the things was, again, the motorcycles that though we had made it clear that we didn't want him on the motorcycles, he actually went and, I don't know how he did it, but the money that he used, he actually bought a motorcycle from a friend, I think, or something. I don't remember I don't remember how that happened, but and I'm sorry, I just don't recall everything that was going on, but it was becoming more troublesome during the summer. I was getting more concerned. In my memory, somehow there's something about drugs, or beginning to be concerned about drugs or alcohol, but I don't recall a specific incident.
So did you see anything around your house, in your house, that made you think, hey, this boy's taking drugs or he's drinking? Did you see anything?
I may have seen some alcohol. I don't recall seeing drugs. No.
What about you and your husband? Did you all drink alcohol?
No.
Did you keep alcohol in the home?
This was the time when everyone gave alcohol at Christmas time, and so our alcohol bottles that we received were often stashed in the garage on a shelf somewhere.
Right. So you didn't drink yourselves, right?
Yeah, my husband may occasionally have. My husband did drink sometimes when he was at company affairs or something, but
not around the house. You guys didn't have wine with dinner or
no, I don't believe
beer
so.
in the
No,
fridge or anything like that.
I did not, for sure. Yeah.
Right. But there was alcohol in the house that had been received as gifts that was kept in the garage, right?
Yes, there were some bottles of alcohol in the garage.
You certainly didn't go out there every day and take a look at those bottles, did you?
No.
You had other things to keep you busy.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes.
And idle hands being the devil's workshop, young men were able to get access to that if they so desired.
I have been told that once the kids were adults, yes. I wasn't aware of it at the time.
Did you ever see him drunk? Under the influence?
I did see Bryan later on when he was older.
Now, in 1991.
No, I don't believe so.
All right. But at some point, the decision was made to send him to the Green Oaks Hospital, right?
Yes.
So tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury how that decision got made.
I don't specifically remember. I'm sorry. I don't remember exactly. I think we were, again, talking to probably the counselors at Anasazi, the wilderness program he'd been on, and other counselors, and they had all suggested that we were trying all these other ways, that maybe we just needed to try what the medical or the psychological community would suggest, which was to, that time, I think Green Oaks wasn't what it is now. I believe it was a private hospital at the time, and it was a private program, and they just said, nothing else is working. We think that you should try this.
You agreed with doing it?
Reluctantly, yes.
Still reluctant today, right?
Yeah.
How about his dad?
His dad pretty much left it to me.
Same
to
pattern,
make the decision, right? And then and he would try to support me in the decisions that were made.
Right. He basically leaves it up to you to try to deal with this family problem. Correct? It's not an unfair characterization, is it?
No, I think it's probably correct.
And how did Bryan feel about being sent to the hospital?
It wasn't entirely voluntary. His dad and a friend pretty much forced him to get in the car and go.
All right, and where was the hospital located?
In Dallas, I believe it's still in the same location. I don't remember the address, but it's somewhere in North Dallas.
All right, so how long was he down there?
I think that he was actually there for maybe a couple of months.
Did you visit him while he was there?
Yes, we were allowed to visit maybe I don't remember, once a week or something. There was a parent program and there was a time to visit, yes, and we did visit.
Did he come out to see you?
I think sometimes we went to the room, and maybe other times there were family or group sessions that we were part of, but I do remember just going to his room myself. He wasn't responding well to the program, and I remember that I did go there myself to try to talk to him.
He prescribed medication?
Yes, they did prescribe medication right away.
What medication was he prescribed?
I don't know. Without looking at the records, I don't know what they were. I think.
Did he take the medication?
I don't think he had a choice when he was there. I think they just administered them. Now that I'm thinking about it, I think they did have some difficulty getting him to take some of the medication.
Did the medication improve his condition?
Didn't seem to very much, no.
Now, how long in total was he in Green Oaks?
He was at the hospital here in Dallas for I don't remember exactly, maybe 6 or 8 weeks, maybe 8 weeks, something like that. They weren't able to diagnose him. They were experimenting with medications but didn't really know how all that was going to work or if it was necessary. And so they suggested they had a residential facility in Austin with a school. And they suggested moving him to the residential facility in Austin where he could go to school and have a maybe a little bit more normal situation.
Right, so, again, this is a private hospital, so it's on you, right?
It was. We did have insurance that paid for a good portion of it.
How did he feel about moving from the Dallas facility to the Austin facility? Did it matter?
I don't remember discussing it with him. I don't think he had a choice, and I think he just, he just went. He wasn't.
And again, the decision-making process in that, was that up to you, or did his father participate in the decision, or did you just, as usual, his father left it up to you?
I believe his father was in on the discussions, but ultimately
It's up to you.
I think it was probably up to me.
And you decided it was best?
I didn't want to do it, but at that point, I really didn't know what else to do. I didn't know what else to do, and so I, decided that we would try it.
Right. And how did it work out?
It didn't work really very well.
Tell me what you mean.
I think the first, they didn't want the parents to visit at the beginning until they didn't want us to visit until Bryan had had time to adjust, start school and adjust. And so we didn't have a lot of interaction with them, which was concerning, but I was trying to follow their directions. And like anything else, it worked. And so mostly the interaction with them was just on the phone, maybe once a week or something. And after he'd been there for almost 3 months, they suddenly brought up that he had never left his room in 3 months.
Well, that had to worry you.
Yeah, that he had.
What'd you do when you heard that?
Well, I told them that they needed to do something, like right now. This couldn't continue. They told me that they were not allowed, I don't know, by law or something, to force him to leave his room, and so they could only do what they could do. And that didn't seem like a very good solution to me. So I don't remember exactly what we did, but I asked them to please move forward in a different direction.
At some point, he came back from the hospital in Austin to your house in Plano under the escort of a counselor from the hospital, right?
Yes, eventually we did get him out of his room. He was participating, and yes, he, at the same time, while he was there, I was still working specifically with Dr. Ray at the Environmental Health Center. And Dr. Ray let me know at one point that there were some doctors coming to Dallas from the National Institutes of Health that had a new diagnostic tool that he wanted, and they were doing a study, and he wanted Bryan very much to be part of that. And so...
And that was related to your concerns about the insect fogging when he was an infant and the chemical exposure in Plano when you moved to Plano, right?
Yes, Dr. Ray had felt, that a lot of his issues stemmed from environmental issues.
That seemed logical to you based on your previous experience.
Yes, I thought that was a very...
So what was the reason that the Green Oaks people sent him back to Plano under the escort of a counselor?
I believe Dr. Ray helped to facilitate that, to have Bryan come back for that test.
All right. So and how long was that test going to take?
I believe it was just one morning.
All right, just one day.
Yes, sir.
All right. So once he got back to your house, did something happen that was unusual?
Yeah, the school decided that maybe once the test was done, it might be good for Bryan to just be able to visit his home, and that might be helpful to him. And so they brought, he had a counselor who came with him, and they came to the house, and Bryan went in the bathroom, and he climbed out the window.
No one expected him to do that, right?
No, he had not shown any signs of, having...
You were concerned enough about that you called the police, right?
I don't believe I called the police, no.
But would it astound you to learn that maybe the police were called?
At this point, yes, I do not recall anything involving the police at that point.
All right, so was there any police response as far as you know? Did you talk to them about it, or they talked to you?
I don't think at that point, no. I think it was just between the school and I and the doctor.
All right. But did he go back to the school?
No.
After he went out the window, how long did he stay gone?
He just stayed around the house, and we ended up talking with him and just making a decision for him to go ahead. And it was the end of the school year, and we just decided to
check him out of the hospital.
Just to let him come home.
He was there because he was a juvenile, and therefore under your authority, and you could check him in or check him out whether he wanted to leave or not, right?
Yes, I believe that's correct.
So you checked him out of the hospital, and when was that? End of school, 1992?
It was May. Sorry, my mind is getting confused about the year. I believe that's correct, yes.
All right. So what did you do after he was checked out of the, excuse me, the hospital, the Green Oaks Hospital in Austin?
Dr. Ray put together a protocol for him and a program for the summer with physical therapy and some, at the center they did a lot of detoxing from poisons and chemicals and that sort of thing, and so he had him involved in some of those therapies and programs. I think he went there.
All right, so
almost every day.
Were they having any good effects, or no?
It did seem, yes, as though he responded to that quite well during the summer.
All right, is he being seen by other counselors, other doctors? You ever see Dr. Myers? Dr. Barbara Myers?
He did have there were doctors. Yes, I believe that was when Dr. Myers was seeing him.
So what kind of a doctor is Dr. Myers? What specialty?
I think she prescribed medications, so I am not certain. I think she was a psychiatrist, but I'm not positive.
How often did he see Dr. Myers?
I don't remember.
All right, you or his dad had to take him, right?
Yes.
All right, and did Dr. Myers give him medication?
I believe she did.
All right,
I don't recall.
Do you know what medication she gave him?
I don't recall now what the medications were. Did
it seem to have any effect on him?
Yes, I believe some of the medications helped. I don't remember. I think, again, no one had really diagnosed him. So I think perhaps they were just working on the idea of maybe depression or something of that sort. So I don't recall what the medications were. I think he maybe began to have some side effects from some of the medications.
Eventually well, let me ask you this. Do you know what obsessive-compulsive disorder is?
Yes, sir, I do.
And was he ever diagnosed with that?
Yes, there was a point around this time. I don't remember the exact timing of all of this, but there was a point at which he developed a very severe OCD.
And so how did you know that had happened? What did you observe that caused you to say now he had a very severe OCD?
It became so severe that he could hardly even get out of his room. It was he had to count his steps or something. There was something counting with it, and it was very intense, mentally debilitating to him.
And painful for you to witness as his mother, right?
Yeah, it was very difficult.
And it's serious. A person with obsessive compulsive disorder has to do things in a certain way, in a certain order, otherwise they feel upset and confused and unable to go any further, right?
I believe that's correct, yes.
And sometimes they have to do things like count their steps or touch certain things in a certain order, and if they mess it up, they have to start all over again, right?
Sure.
I mean, it might seem harmless to walk around to walk a 2-mile route and count every step. That might seem a little eccentric but harmless. But on the other hand, if you skip a number in the middle and have to go back and start all over again. It starts to interfere with your life, right?
Yes.
How was it with Bryan? What did you see? Tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what you saw about his OCD behaviors that are causing you to be upset and teary-eyed about it right now.
Just that it was so difficult for him even to get out of his room, to walk across the hallway to a bathroom or to leave. To leave the house, or if we went somewhere and he got out of the car, sometimes it was difficult for him even to get back to the car again, even though it was maybe a short distance. And when I spoke with the doctors or with the hospital, I think they tried some medications, some things to help him, and at some point they told me that if I wanted to bring him to the hospital, they could keep him safe there, but that they didn't have any idea of what to do. They didn't know any way to help him. And at that point, I contacted our oriental medicine doctor, and he agreed to see Bryan, and Bryan began treatment with him, and that was the only treatment that helped him. Eventually, he was able to manage it, at least through the puncture and the herbs and, various things that we did.
At this point, he's 18 or 19, right? 17, 18, 19 in there.
Yeah, I guess that's probably right, yeah.
Was he in school?
At this point, I think we were still homeschooling and doing correspondence school.
So he doesn't have many school peers.
We're trying to work the school in between these other issues, yeah.
Got a girlfriend?
There were girls in the group in the neighborhood that I know that he was friends with. I don't know specifically a girlfriend.
Well engaged with a group of peers or not?
I didn't see a lot of the friends that he had. Most of them at this point, I think, were kids that were maybe just a little bit outside of our neighborhood that he'd formed friendships with that I didn't know. I didn't know their families. And they were not often at our home, so I didn't know who all of them were. There were a few that I did know, but not very many of them.
Because it sounds to me, what you're describing sounds to me like a person who's psychiatrically disabled. I mean, not able to live a normal life. Am I getting that wrong?
There were definitely some difficulties there, but it wasn't that, other than the time that the severe OCD, there were times in between when it seemed normal. It wasn't a constant thing all the time. He did have long, periods of time in between when things seemed okay.
All right. So was he able to graduate from high school?
We did graduate him. Yes, we did graduate him at a certain point. I can't remember if it was 95.
What high school was it?
Basically from our home school. He had credits from numerous schools that he had attended and correspondence courses and so on, but he had credits from Green Oaks and he gotten them on the trail at Anasazi at various other programs that he had been part of.
So he completed his high school requirements over the years at the several different schools he attended, and he was issued a diploma, right? Yes,
and we did some testing and some grade level testing and so on, and yes, he did graduate.
So, what did he do after he finished high school?
I think he. Sorry, I can't remember everything here. I think at that point, I think he was doing some work maybe for his dad. But pretty quickly after this, we were having some problems that were clearly drug-related.
All right, you say clearly drug-related. Why? Because before you maybe thought there were some drugs, but it wasn't too clear. Why do you say clearly drug-related now?
I think there were, I'm sorry, I don't remember the specifics. I remember there was alcohol. We definitely had alcohol. I think there was, at some point, I think there was some pot that we found.
In your house?
I think so.
In what form?
I don't remember. I think it was just loose. I think it was in a bag.
Right, and how much was it?
Not very much, and a little bit in a bag, a little bit in a baggie. And I think the other parents had told me that they had found some things with their children too or their teenagers that indicated that they had all been.
So Bryan's at home at this time. He's like 18, 19. Where's John?
I think John was home until he was somewhere around 20, and then he moved out. So I guess at this point, John was probably not living at home any longer.
Where is he, if you know?
He was in an apartment and he was working. He'd been working since he was 16.
Right. So, at some point, it became necessary to seek help from the Collin County Mental Health Court, right?
Yes.
And that was in May of 1996, right?
Yes.
So Bryan would have been close to almost 20 at that point.
Yes.
So how did that happen? Why did that happen?
I got some mail one day. I received a package that, when I looked at it, it was a gun.
Mailed to your house?
Yes, sir.
All right.
That I found had been ordered online and sent to the house. And he was seeing a psychiatrist at the time.
Who was he seeing?
His last name. I'm sorry, I don't remember his name now.
All right,
I remember his first name was James, but I can't remember his last name now.
All right, so did that alarm you, that you received a package at your house that contained a firearm?
Yes, sir. And
what'd you do about that?
Well, I called the psychiatrist, and I don't remember everything that I did. I remember calling the psychiatrist, talking to the counselors.
They tell you what you needed to do in an official, procedural way to bring the matter to the attention of the mental health court. Let me help you out. May I approach the witness, Your Honor? Cahill, let me show you this document. It's Defense Exhibit 4. You've seen at least some of the documents in this group before, right?
Yes, sir.
In particular, that one, right? Yep. All right, so, you went to the mental health court and you, asked for their help with your son, right?
I don't remember exactly how it all unfolded, but I remember that something had happened with I think with Bryan's dad or something, that Bryan had come home and had been confrontational, and on the advice of counselors, I think I had called the Plano police, and they had come to the house, and they discussed with me the filing charges, or them taking Bryan and charging him with a misdemeanor. They promised me that it would only be a misdemeanor, and I believe that I agreed to do that, and that they go ahead and with them that night.
All right, so we're going with, but the point is, you asked them for help, and they told you what to do, and you did it, and these documents show that, right?
Yeah, I believe the next morning the judge actually helped me do that with the.
Officer four. Okay. Well, thank you.
Defense 4 is admitted.
So, here, first of all, this is 25 years ago, right?
Yes, sir.
So, that's one reason it's hard to remember the details of it, right?
Yes, I don't remember exactly how it came about. I just remember that the next morning that I was able to speak with the judge that was going to, they were going to bring Bryan in, and the judge was going to speak with him, and she and the doctor spoke as well as I did, and we decided to go ahead and have the doctor put together that document and see if we could get treatment for Bryan, because we were trying to get him into treatment, and we just weren't able to do so because of his age.
And so, all these actions that you took that are epitomized there in Defense Exhibit 4, you did that at the suggestion of the public officials that you'd called for help, right?
Yes, sir.
They gave you some guidance about what you ought to do, and you relied on their guidance and did what they suggested.
Yes, sir.
And so, when the documents were filed, what happened?
I believe Bryan was actually still in the jail. They told me that I spoke with a Plano police lieutenant who told me that he would have Bryan processed out and released. And in the meantime, the mental health court had issued the document that you just showed, and so he arranged for the officers to be outside so that when Bryan was released, he was then picked up on this order immediately and taken to the hospital.
All right. So which hospital did they take him to?
I don't remember the name of it. It was in McKinney.
All right. And how long was he there?
I'm sorry, I don't remember exactly.
Did you visit him at the hospital in McKinney?
At some point, I think we did. I think at some point I visited. I don't recall exactly.
And you can't recall how long he was there?
Probably maybe a month.
All right.
But I don't remember. He went to Baylor. At some point he went to Baylor, and I don't remember if they just transferred him from there down to Baylor or whether he stayed there that time.
All right, so he was at a hospital in McKinney, and then he went, where was the Baylor hospital that he went to?
I was in Richardson.
Richardson, all right. And he stayed in the hospital in Baylor Richardson for a while, right?
Yes, sir.
And then what happened, how long did he stay there, if you know?
I don't remember exactly how long, probably, again, maybe a month.
All right, and when he was discharged from Baylor, what happened?
I don't remember the exact time frame, but soon thereafter, perhaps immediately, he was enrolled in a program, an outpatient program down in Dallas. It's called Solutions, and it was every day. It was a program every day, every afternoon and evening, every day.
So how did he was he living with you at that point?
Yes, sir.
And so how did he get from the house in Plano down to the Solutions Outpatient Services in Dallas?
We took him there each day.
So you drove him back and forth every day?
Yes, sir.
Where was it, the Solutions Outpatient? Where in Dallas?
It's down, it's a tollway, and I forgot the exact address.
Is it all the way downtown?
No, it's not all the way downtown.
All right, but
it's closer to Love Field.
All right, so it's all the way down to Love Field.
Close.
And you were taking him there every day?
Yes, sir.
5 days a week? 7, which?
I think it was 5 days a week.
5 days a week. So, looking back on the experience of asking for help from the mental health court and seeking the judge's order, did that help your son or hurt your son? Was it effective or ineffective?
It helped a great deal, yes.
Right. So, at that point, how long did he keep going to the outpatient services program in Dallas?
That was almost a full year.
All right, and so he's going there all day, every day, 5 days a week for a year?
Yeah, I believe it was about a year, yes.
All right, and so you're driving him back and forth all that time, all those times?
Yes, I think so.
Working? Didn't have time to work, I guess.
No, I think he may have been doing work for his dad during the day. I think probably he was. Most of the time he did do that.
All right, so what kind of work was he doing for his dad?
Most of the time that he worked for his dad, I think that, which he did for a very long time, I think he helped him, I don't know, maybe with, definitely with IT and computer issues, with mailings, with maybe, I don't know if he was doing loan processing for him at the time or not, but probably not, but just helping with whatever office chores he needed help with.
All right, so did he go to another treatment facility in Hunt, Texas after he got finished with the Solutions Outpatient Services?
Yes, sir. At the end of their program, they felt that he still needed a little bit more, and their program was just a year, so he went, yes, to that. It was a residential. It was about maybe a month, or I think it was set up to be like a 4 to 6 week program.
All right, and where was it?
It was in Hunt, Texas.
What was the name of it?
La Hacienda.
And what was it treating? What was the purpose of the treatment there?
It was basically a drug and alcohol treatment, and they felt that he needed a little bit more support before he came back into his own neighborhood.
All right, and so once he completed the treatment at La Hacienda, did he come home or did he go to another treatment facility?
While he was there, they began to work a little bit more on the aspect of perhaps a dual diagnosis instead of just a drug and alcohol problem, that there were some other issues going on.
What other issues?
I think they saw the OCD.
Sounds consistent with what you'd seen before, right?
Yes.
What else, if anything else?
I don't recall exactly at the time what else. Maybe, they always use the term depression, some kind of general terms like that.
All right. So, did in fact they send him to or did they send him, or did he go to another facility after La Hacienda?
They made some suggestions for some other facilities, and we were still working with his the team that he had at Solutions, and they had a program that they especially liked that was in California. That was a 3-month program that did specifically work with dual diagnosis. So yes, so then he went out to that program.
What's the name of that one?
It's called Michael's House.
All right, and did, again, I mean, so that was paid for by you and your husband?
Our insurance was very generous with us too. They were very helpful. Yes.
All right, so did he stay at Michael's house for the full 3-month period?
Yes, he did.
Now, how much contact with him did you have while he was in Palm Springs?
I think probably it was a little bit more like maybe once a week with him. I did speak with his counselors several times a week, I think, while he was there. And then I also did go out there a couple of times for parent programs.
All right. So what's your take on how he was doing out there? Was he making progress or no?
Yes, he was making some progress. He still had a lot of difficulty with some of the OCD that was still showing up, but he was doing much better. Yes.
How about his relationships with you and his dad? Good, bad, the same? How?
Definitely there was improvement over time. There were sometimes, there was some conflict sometimes about his desire to come home. And
but he wanted to come home, but you didn't think he was ready to come yet?
Correct, yes. And so those were difficult conversations, yes. He couldn't sometimes understand why we didn't wanted him to stay there and complete the program.
So, when was he discharged from Michael's house?
As their program was ending, the counselors there felt that he needed a lot of support. Didn't think that he would get that by just coming back home again. And so they began to look around, and they found a program that they suggested for him that's a farm in Vermont. That's a therapeutic community that's been there since, I believe, since the 1940s. That's where it's a working farm. They have animals, they have crops, they have a maple syrup business, and it's adults. It was adults, and Bryan was an adult at that point, and so we took a look at that program, thought it was good. At the they have a time on the farm as long as they need to be on the farm, and then at some point they move into town and get a job at an apartment, and so they had a lot of support throughout, for the program itself, and then also after the program. So we thought that would seem to be a very good program. We spoke with them, and so we did arrange for Bryan he came back here to Dallas, and then we put him on the plane, and he went to Vermont for that program.
Wow, that was a big change. Where was the place in Vermont?
It's
Rutland?
A town called Rutland, yes. Or it's outside of town. It's not in, it's a farm outside of town, yes.
And he was up there for 3 years, wasn't he?
Almost, or 2.5. Yeah.
And what contact did you have with him while he was living in Vermont?
And I think we spoke with him and the staff maybe weekly. Probably, I don't remember if we did a lot of letter writing. I don't think there was as much letter writing with that, but we did talk with him.
Traveled to Vermont to see him up there?
Yes, I did go to Vermont a number of times. I'm going to say maybe 4, 5, 6 times.
I mean, that's good. That's kind of remote up there. Vermont's not that easy to get to from Texas. You got to fly into New York and rent a car and drive for hours, or fly into Boston and rent a car and drive for hours,
yeah,
right?
Go to Boston, yeah.
I mean, it's not something you can decide to do over a weekend. You have to devote 4 or 5 days to it at least.
Sometimes that's true. I was working, some of that time I was working on the East Coast, and so it was a little bit easier for me to make
All right, so you can combine what kind of business were you doing up there?
I worked for an insurance company, and I was up there for some storms that we'd had.
And that's the work you're doing now. You work for an insurance company now, right?
Yes, sir.
So when were you divorced from Brian's dad? Was it after this time?
I believe it was in 2000, I believe.
All right, so while Brian was at the farm, that's when your marriage ended?
Yeah, around that same time, yeah.
All right. So what happened to cause him to leave the farm?
He had finished at the farm and had moved into town. He had gotten a job in town and had his own apartment, and was doing very well and wanted to come back to Dallas. It was hard for him to be up there without his family around, and he wanted to be back where he had some family support. And so we gave it a lot of consideration, talked about it a lot, and eventually we agreed for him to come back to Dallas.
All right. So looking back on it, his time at the farm in Vermont is the best time he's had in his life. Is that fair?
He did very well there, yes.
So when he came back to Dallas from Vermont, did he live with you or did he have his own apartment?
He moved into his own apartment.
Right. And where was that?
It was in North Dallas. I don't remember the exact location.
And how was he supporting himself?
When he came back, he went back. Before he had gone, he had been working for a little bit with a counselor at, I think it was called Workforce Commission, or it was a state, whatever the state agency was. He'd been working with a counselor there prior to going to Vermont, and so he came back and he reconnected with her, and she got him into a training program that was basically, I guess you might say, an IT or a software or a computer programming, or I've forgotten what the exact course was, but into some training course anyway. And so he went to that school and graduated from that school, and then then he got a job at Earthlink, which was it was an internet provider at the time, and so he got a job there, and a customer, kind of an IT customer support type of position.
Did he continue to have problems with emotional illness, mental illness, the kinds of problems he basically had since he was 10 years old at this point?
No, he seemed to be doing very well. He, remember correctly, he, perhaps by this time, I think maybe by this time they had come down to maybe just 1 or 2 medications that seemed to help him, and I think he pretty much stayed with those medications.
Right, and of course, to be fair, you were less involved at this point.
Correct.
Right? I mean, he's a grown man living on his own, got his own job, living in his own apartment. You're not seeing him every day, are you?
No, definitely not.
Nor are you monitoring or arranging his medical treatment. That's
Correct.
up to him.
Yes, sir.
Did he ever work with Texas behavioral systems?
Yes, I think before he went to Vermont, I think he had a psychiatrist here that he was working with. I don't remember his name now, but when he came back, he went back to that particular psychiatrist, and at some point, he closed his practice and referred all of his patients to the doctor that's now at, I think they call it Texas Behavioral Health now, but the doctor there.
Is that Dr. Hamilton?
Yes, sir.
All right, so when he came back from Vermont, he remained under the treatment of one psychiatrist or another.
For medication only, yes.
One psychiatrist that he had used before until that psychiatrist retired and referred all his patients to another one.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you were still living in the house on Cypress in Plano, right?
No, I had moved out, I think in 1999 or 1999.
All right. That was surrounding your divorce from your husband.
Yes.
All right. But you were living in a house in Plano. Your son, Bryan, was living in an apartment in North Dallas.
I was living in Dallas at the time. Yeah, I was in Farmers Branch. So,
I mean, y'all were in the same general area, but again, you didn't see each other every day.
No.
Right?
No, definitely not.
So that's he left the farm in Vermont sometime in the year 2000, and things are pretty stable after that until when?
I wouldn't say things were unstable, but I think they stayed really stable until maybe 2018 or so. We did have difficulty just getting a job, finding himself there, but wasn't terribly involved. He was on his own for the most part, yeah.
So what are the different places where he lived?
I don't know those addresses. He was in several different apartments.
All right. So, visit him in those apartments?
Yes, I think I did.
Right.
Yeah.
The one that he was living in at the time of his arrest, did you ever visit him there?
Yes.
Did you ever take groceries up there to him?
Yes.
That seems like that might be a little unusual. Why were you taking groceries to him?
And can you clarify that? We took a big leap here. I'm not sure what year you're in.
Why didn't he? Well, you said you started to notice things kind of going downhill in 2018.
Oh, okay.
Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. And I asked you, did you visit him at the La Hacienda apartments where he was when he got arrested? And
yes.
I asked you, had you taken groceries up there to him? You said yes. So what I want to know is, that seems a little unusual to me. Why were you taking groceries to him?
Don't know that I took him there myself. I think I helped him to carry groceries up and down quite a few times.
All right, so he was able to get his own groceries.
Sometimes
he needed you to bring them to him.
No, sometimes I think when I was going to see him, I probably stopped at the grocery store and bought things. I think I did that quite a few times, yes.
Did you notice things at that time that made you think, wow, he's getting to the point where he's scared of things, he's worried?
Yes.
Like, what did you see?
He seemed very paranoid.
What did you observe or hear him say that makes you think he was paranoid? Let me ask you this, did he ever tape up places in his apartment?
Yes, sir.
And what, did that seem unusual to you?
Yes, he thought that the neighbors were trying to poison him or pump something through the air ducts.
Person witness, Your Honor? Show you these pictures here, Ms. Cahill. They're defenses 5, 6, 7, and 8. Are all these pictures made inside Bryan's apartment?
I believe so.
And they all show things taped up, tape over heating and air conditioning registers, tape over an electric outlet. I was off of these, by the way. What's going on with taping up all these apertures?
He thought that neighbors were trying to poison him in some way.
You didn't really think the neighbors were trying to do anything to him, did you?
No, sir.
These were exclusive beliefs on his part, correct?
As far as I know.
That would worry me. Did it worry you?
Yes, sir.
What'd you do about it?
I was trying to get him, get him some treatment. I was trying to get him to go speak with a counselor or get into some kind of, get some help of some sort.
Did you ever call the Frisco police about that?
Yes, sir.
How many times?
I think twice.
Right, and remember when the first time was?
I don't recall the date, and
All right, do you remember what
perhaps
the
it was December
of 2018?
18, probably.
All right, and what did you want? What was what happened on that day to make you decide? Okay, today I got to call the police about this.
I think things had just reached a point where every day I had to make a decision had to decide whether what he was telling me, whether he was going to act upon it or not. He had never been physical. I've never seen him harm anyone or anything, but I had to make a decision when he was making some threats. So I think I called them when I thought that there was maybe things were at a point where where he might do something.
All right, so did they suggest to you what they thought you ought to do?
Well, they said they could go out and try to talk to him or call him and see if they could, and talk to him and see if they could find out what was going on. I think one of the times, I don't remember if it was both times, but I think once anyway, they may have suggested contacting the mental health court. That's all that I really remember them.
All right. Well, did they suggest to you that you ought to contact the mental health court like you'd done in 1996 and swear out a mental health warrant on him?
I think they did suggest that to me. I already was aware of that process, and I had
it before.
Well, not just yes, I did know from 1996, but I had also actually spoken with the court myself prior to that.
You didn't do that. You didn't go see the court and swear out a mental health warrant.
I did not, because when I spoke with them, they told me...
All right, so regardless of what they told you, so you spoke with them about it, and they talked to you about it and told you something, right?
Yes, sir.
And then, based on what they told you, you decided, well, I'm not going to go any further with this.
Correct.
Why did you make that decision?
Because they told me that...
No, they can't. You can't say what they told you, because that's here.
I don't know what to say then.
Okay, well, all right. Why didn't you go further with the mental health commitment?
They told me that if I went with that what they would do, the process would be that they would get that paper, they would hand it to me, and it would be my responsibility to take it to the Frisco police, and the Frisco police would go out and try to make contact with Bryan. So it wasn't any different than
what they'd already done.
They'd already told me that they'd done, yes, than what they'd already done, and it was clear that it was not going to be any different.
And your previous experience in 1996 with the mental health commitment was that in the end, it didn't accomplish very much.
What they were offering to me did not seem to me even to be what we did in 1996. It didn't seem to me that we were even going to get to that point. Maybe that was because Bryan was, just because it just coincided with him being picked up by the police already. I don't know how that was, but it didn't look like the same process to me. They just told me that it would be my responsibility to go to the police and take that warrant or whatever the document was, and that they couldn't force him to do anything. They would try to make contact with him, and if he didn't respond, they couldn't do anything.
I mean, at this point, you're a lady that's 70 years old, right? 69, 70?
Yeah.
He's 40. He's a grown man, right?
Mm-hmm.
This has to be anguish for you. Every day you're dealing with this. Is that
Yes.
fair?
Yes, sir.
All right. And did you do all you knew how to do to try to make some progress with this?
Did everything I could think of every day, yes.
Was your son in distress?
Yes, he was.
What was his relationship like with you before he got arrested?
It was pretty much every day was a roller coaster ride. It was, start out and things that seemed to be going really well. A lot of hope for the day. Things looked like they were getting better. Maybe they went okay for a couple of days, and then all of a sudden everything would seem to fall apart again. Then it would seem very normal. And we go back to being normal or things getting better, and then it just went in a cycle.
So how did you find out about the events of the 29th of March, 2019? How did you find out about all these horrible events that caused us all to be here today?
I got a phone call at my office from...
Who was it from?
A Frisco... I've forgotten his name, but a Frisco policeman.
All right, and he let you know in a general way that your son was involved in a shooting incident in Frisco.
No, he told me that my son had had an altercation with a DPS officer and wanted to know if I could come up to the apartment.
All right.
Didn't know what had happened.
I mean, that had to put your heart in your heels. Drive yourself up there?
No, I told him that I couldn't leave the office for a little bit. I was the last person there, and it was late in the afternoon, and that I couldn't leave the office right away. And he told me, just sit tight, I'll be there. And he came to
the officer came, and you work in Richardson, right?
Yes, sir.
So he had to drive from Frisco down to Richardson.
Yes, he came to the office, yeah.
All right, and he picked you up and took you where?
To the Frisco police station.
All right, and you cooperated with the investigation, right?
Sure.
All right. Do you know Ranger Mencken back here? But you talked to the Texas Ranger that was investigating this, right?
Yes, I never met him, but I did speak with him on the phone.
All right, and other officers who were asking you about this, you've cooperated and told them whatever they wanted to know?
I believe he was the only one that I spoke with.
All right, so your son's been in jail ever since the 29th of March, 2019, so 26 months. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And have you cut off your relationship with him, or have you tried to keep a relationship going with him?
No, sir, I tried to support him.
And how do you do that?
The only way is talking to him on the telephone, or going to the jail to visit.
I mean, so first of all, where's he been housed in the jail, as far as you understand?
For most of the time, he was in the special handling unit in a cell by himself and in isolation.
All right, and so how often was he allowed out of the cell while he was in the special housing unit?
For about an hour a day.
So 23 hours a day in a cell and 1 hour out.
That's my understanding, yes.
All right, now, were you able to see him face to face, or did you have to visit him over a video link?
No, it was over a video.
And was there any point during which that was cut off because of the big virus epidemic we're just now getting out of?
Yes.
And how did you visit with him then?
Just on the telephone until at some point, they set up the Zoom, the video calls. At some point, they made that available. I think his unit was probably one of the last ones, but at some point, that became available.
All right, now, how many phone calls did you have with you, sir?
How many phone calls?
Yeah, in the last 26 months.
I spoke with him just about every day.
All right. Video visits.
I don't think they started. I don't remember when they started, but whenever they started, I had them pretty much every time they were available, 2 or 3 times a week.
Right. And have you ever been able to see him, like, through the glass, where you're sitting on one side of the glass and he's on the other and you're talking on the phone? Do you ever have that much of a face-to-face visit or not?
Not until, I think it was maybe last month or the month before, when he was moved into a different unit, and then they opened it up for us to be able to come back into the jail.
All right. Now, sometimes when he talks to you, he talks mean, doesn't he?
Yes, sir.
And how long has that been going on?
I'm going to say that probably really began the most maybe in 2018.
Just from the moment that you noticed the paranoia starting to emerge.
Yeah, for the most part, yes.
Now, got to cut you to the heart, darling. Does it?
Yes, yes, of course it does. It's very difficult to handle.
Is that how he always is with you?
No, not always. And a great deal of it is just that his way of trying to process things is that he starts out at that point with the frustration, especially since he's been in the jail, but even in the months leading up to it when he was under tremendous stress. His way is to start out with that. Just he wants to be able to process things, to be able to express some things, and when he can't, it just becomes worse and worse. But I found that if I can let him go ahead and say the things he has to say, he pretty much talks himself off the cliff at a certain point, calms down, and will express his appreciation for having been heard, and then his love. So it's a quite different side than the way that it starts out, most of the conversations.
Ever been convicted of a felony in this state or any other state?
No, sir.
You ever received a suspended or a probated sentence for a felony in this state or any other state?
No, sir.
How does he feel about the events, the actions that he took that caused him to be here now? Move on to the next question. All right. You're aware that we are approaching the end of this trial, right?
Yes, sir.
You know that he has pleaded guilty to all of the crimes with which he's been charged, right?
Didn't know for sure, but yes, I thank you for telling me.
In the evidence, the judge will and must instruct the jury to find him guilty of all these crimes. You understand that?
Yes.
All right. And that it will be up to the jury to decide what the punishment should be.
Yes.
All right. And you understand that the range in which they can decide is a very wide one. You understand that?
Yes.
They could recommend to the judge that he receive probation, in which case he will receive probation, or they could sentence him to prison for life. They could do that, right? That's the range in which they can make their choice.
Yes.
Now, I'm sure, I mean, you're his mother and you love him, even despite everything, right?
Yes.
So I'm sure it'll come as no surprise if I ask you what you would like the jury to do. You'll say you want them to give him probation, right?
I would like to see him be able to get treatment. We have a lot more information now, and I would like to be able to see him get treatment.
Is there anything else that you can tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury to help them make this very hard decision that they're going to have to make?
I'd like for them to see the other side of Bryan, which is very kind and generous and loving. I would like for them to realize that we now have a lot of information we didn't have before that would certainly help to identify what's been going on that we haven't been able to identify in the past. And I think that he has a very good chance of a lot of healing. He's gone through just tremendous mental and emotional suffering while he's been in isolation. I can't even begin to communicate what that has been like, to be in a little cell 24 hours a day, even for a healthy person, let alone for someone with his difficulties. And he's been able somehow to get through that. And I just would hate to come to this point now and not offer him that opportunity for some treatment and for an opportunity to work his way just to be able to come back.
That's a witness.
break for lunch. Members of the jury, please be back in the jury room at 1:30.
All rise.
Still had a chance to go through the charges. Right, let's go off the record. Do either of you anticipate having a lot of requested changes?